So much for still being with us on Thursday's edition of Morning at NTV. As we continue on with the 25th, we have to look at the other side of things that have to support the economy of our country. I am Priscilla Regina Nalwaga. Welcome to our Tech Note. Now, in our Tech Note this morning, we're going to be focusing on the investment climate and the opportunities that be before us in 2024, especially for us in Uganda, and the efforts to fortify private markets. The backbone of it being that the Dutch East India Company, established in the 17th century, is often considered as the precursor when it comes to modern corporations, marking the beginning of institutional investments. However, formalized investment research gained momentum in the 20th century with the advent of stock exchanges and the increasing complexity with financial markets. Morning at NTV is extending a hand of discussion to be a beacon for those interested in unlocking opportunities in alternative investments, as well as gaining deeper insights when it comes to private markets here in Uganda. And to set the pace for us, we are joined by Mr. David Ivan Wangolo, who is the Chief Financial Analyst as well as Investment Director with Pearl Capital Partners. Good morning to you, Mr. Wangolo.
Good morning, Priscilla.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Let's first start by understanding from where you are seated and your experience what the investment climate looks like for us in Uganda.
I think the investment climate in Uganda and East Africa in general is facing a bit of turbulence, and this turbulence has been brought on largely by capital flowing out or flowing back to where it has usually come from, which is foreign capital, with the challenges of interest rates and inflation happening globally, and also, tax revenues really going down for our governments who have been really the front runners of investment. Therefore, we are looking at opportunities at how private capital can be now brought into the space to formally plug the gap for where investment is now really falling short and leading to collapse of business or collapse of economies that we are seeing in the East Africa region and Uganda specifically. Yes. Okay,
all right. Investment opportunities in Uganda, I know that they are numerous and they're ready for people to jump onto, especially local and foreign investors. And in post-COVID-19, what do those look like? Which are the opportunities? Where are the windows and the doors?
So what we're seeing is there is a bit of opportunity to invest in corporate enterprises, from the SME side of things. And foreign and private capital is being encouraged to now boost those investments, because that will create the jobs and that will create the aggregate demand required to boost the economy to go forward. Now, if you want to speak to sectors, that is of course quite broad, because all sectors are open really for investment in Uganda. We're having a huge gap of investment capital coming in, and therefore, as the Alternative Investment Conference, we are saying that we should catalyze private local capital or institutional private capital to start to look at alternative investments beyond the traditional investments that they look at. We know that the problem is institutional investors in Uganda largely are buying treasury bills and bonds, and all their capital is allocated there. But that then crowds out the private sector from accessing that capital. And this is the issue we're saying. There are alternatives beyond the traditional asset classes or the main asset classes that have been promoted for risk mitigation and return.
And then it begs the question to educate our audience, what are the present alternative elements of investment that we can look at?
So from an institutional perspective, I think we need to broaden and deepen our knowledge on assets such as real estate, infrastructure. We need to broaden our knowledge on private equity and venture capital, where a lot of change is happening on a regulatory level and legislative level in terms of starting to domicile private equity funds and venture capital funds locally in Uganda. That can be used to leverage on foreign capital coming in if the private players can put the initial shilling forward. That then encourages foreign players to say, well, that seems to be an area that we can invest since the locals believe in it. And the regulation is such that we need to be competitive in terms of the efficiency of capital allocation. And what does that mean? It means that when capital is allocated, it shouldn't be taxed. When capital is allocated, it should be allowed to work for longer periods of time, such that then it can transform business. When capital is then moving out of country, it shouldn't be exorbitantly taxed on its exit, such that then foreigners have the interest to actually stay longer rather than exit the country. And also, when capital is formally registered, then it gets out from the murky waters and comes into the public domain, where other players can participate and perform in an institutional environment.
Okay. Yeah. While that is the ideal picture, Mr. Wangolo, the reality on the ground is that these investors that we're trying to speak to this morning are faced with challenges, especially the local investor. There's the high taxation, the policy hiccups, the weaknesses here and there in the system that are hurting the kind of diversity that you are advocating for. It begs the question, how do we make Uganda the focal point of such investments and their alternatives when you have especially the foreign investor who has the option of looking elsewhere to a better accommodating market than Uganda?
So for the local investors, what we are saying is, and this is together with the Capital Markets Authority, so for vehicles such as private equity or venture capital that invest in corporate securities in a private space, we are saying that the Capital Markets Authority should recognize this capital. And if recognized, there should be tax advantages for that kind of capital. Then we take capital out from dark areas into the light. Now, for the foreign investors, we are saying that we as Ugandans must invest in our country first. So the institutional investors, the pension funds, the fund managers must put capital locally first before we start to attract the foreign capital. As I mentioned in the beginning, that there's a global challenge to capital movement, and capital is moving away from the peripheries where Uganda lies back to the center where it feels safe. Now, to get it back into Uganda and not in the treasury bills or government securities, but in the private space, we need to create vehicles that are formally regulated, recognized by our authorities, the regulators, Capital Markets Authority, the Registration Bureau, and then that capital can then be deployed into the economy in an efficient way. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that you are having an upcoming conference, the second edition of its kind. Let's first date back to the first edition. And what was it focusing on, and those focal points, have they been achieved in any way?
So the first edition was initially to introduce, the alternative asset class. And we feel that we attained, policy guys in the room, we attained regulators in the room, and we had investors and potential, deals in the room. So that then brought the effort together, the collaborative effort together. Now, with that collaborative effort, we want to now take it into actionable steps. What does that mean for institutional investors? Institutional investors that have been traditionally deploying capital in the government securities, what else exists and how can we tap into those assets? So we are bringing the regulators to come and offer, the comfort that now we recognize alternative assets such as private equity and venture capital, and you can actually place capital in these assets and attract foreign capital in efficient vehicles that are competitive, as in jurisdictions such as Mauritius, where that capital tends to domicile. We're also saying that there are vehicles such as real estate and infrastructure where institutional investors in the pension sectors can actually deploy capital rather than just deploying all the money into the government securities. And there are managers coming into the room to present their value propositions to allow that capital move into those assets on a long-term basis. Okay.
And so the second one, what are the details of that conference? Who are you attracting in particular, and when is it going to be happening?
So the details, the main actors in that conference will be, of course, investors who are interested in investing, but we are focusing on the local capital pools.
And what's the investment portfolio you're looking at?
So we're looking at a broad portfolio. And as an institutional investor, you look at a broad portfolio. You'd want to look at securities, whether those are public or private. You'd want to look at real estate. You'd want to look at infrastructure. So we are bringing in the investors to look at a broader portfolio of assets. And we are emphasizing that it should be local investors. We must emphasize local formation of capital to be able to attract foreign capital at attractive rates. But we also must provide the breadth of assets that they can invest in and ask the regulation to conform or, change to the direction that we need to broaden the asset allocation. And so that is for the investors. Then for those managers who are providing these assets, we're also bringing those into the room to explain and deepen the knowledge about these assets and how they can be registered, in the local context, in favorable jurisdictions that also continue to attract foreign capital here. We're also looking at the regulators, because we can't do this without the regulators, to be in the room to offer the comfort that they do understand these assets and there will not be, confusion or misalignment of purpose. We're also inviting the policy people, especially at the Ministry of Finance, to just also understand and give guidance in the, understanding of where investment is going, where capital is coming from in a private nature, and how do we treat it, from a tax point of view, and from a recognition point of view.
Okay. One of the things that you have continually mentioned as far as investments is called the alternatives is real estate. So I want to look at the growing real estate sector for us here in Uganda, and there are many investment opportunities that are available, especially for commercial as well as, of course, private residential buildings here and there. And begs the question, what are the strategies that are available for you to capture value for private equity?
So what are the strategies we're trying to promote at the Alternative Investment Conference? Now, institutional investors, especially in the pension side, are not actively pursuing those assets.
Right.
These assets are being pursued in dark pools of capital, or pools of capital that we don't know about, or pools of capital that we're not aware about. And that tends to bring challenges, especially for regulators and the government, to understand who are these people and what are they doing.
We sit here and say,
yes.
Real estate is laundering.
Exactly. It appears to, offer opportunities for those kinds of things.
Yes.
So the conference is trying to provide or spot a light on that asset, but also make pension and regulated pools of capital to look at that asset in a brighter light. That way, if we marry the two, real estate and public or capital that is recognized and regulated, we shall then elevate our real estate sector to stop looking as though it's one of the areas for dark capital to an area for brighter capital, and certainly will lead to better price discovery for real estate assets.
Well, looking forward to the reality of that. Let's talk about exploring investment best practices in Uganda and why those particular ones in this time.
So as the CFA Institute, for which the CFA Society is affiliated, we attract members whose values are around ethics, particularly, and diligence in capital management. And of course, the members of the CFA Society of East Africa, include those who have the CFA designation as investment professionals, those pursuing that designation to be chartered financial analysts, and other members who like to associate with the values of ethics and diligence in investment management. We believe that if we continue to champion investment professionals in this space, then we have our clients, or we have our public, reaching out for proper and concrete investment advice that is driven by ethical conduct and diligence in the management of client funds.
Okay, there's another sector that we believe also has potential in that regard, and that's the tourism sector. In regards to investments, is that a consideration with the alternatives that you did mention earlier?
Yes, I mean the tourism sector certainly comes in as an important sector for the growth of the Ugandan economy, and through private equity and venture capital, vehicles, we can deploy capital, in tourism assets. And grow the sector in a private sector space. So certainly the alternative of private equity and venture capital offers an opportunity for tourism and other sectors in Uganda to access, private capital for growth.
Okay. There is another event that you are equally holding in this regard.
Yes, so we are promoting this as an investment week. So on June 12th, we shall be having the Alternative Investment Conference that has been organized and is being promoted by the CFA Society of East Africa alongside the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda. In the same breath, during the same week, we shall have the East Africa Venture Capital Association doing the 8th annual conference in Uganda. So moving away from the Kenya market to the Uganda, which is a good plus for our market. And they'll be hosting this on the 13th, on the following day, just to strengthen the discussion around investments and opportunities and bring in different players to understand our market a little better, and also meet our local players, which enhances our skills, our knowledge, and our ability to actually network, in a wider East Africa environment. Okay.
And then at the end of the day, we still also, you mentioned skills and knowledge, and those are definitely gaps that need to be bridged. How are you enabling that bridging?
So the CFA Society is largely advocacy and education. So it promotes that, and we are saying we are training people as proper investment advisors into this space and recognizing them as members of the CFA Society of East Africa. So that is a badge of recognition of knowledge, that this is a person with knowledge, this is a person with skill, and this is the person who should be entrusted with investment funds. That's one. Two, we are meeting out with regulators as the CFA Society of East Africa to educate them on the different asset classes that exist, such that they can create the right and relevant regulation for this market that remains competitive in regard to attracting capital from foreign players. Further to that, we are also working closely with policy, especially at the Ministry of Finance. And in that regard, we collaborate in advocacy in areas where we feel that capital allocation is inefficient and can be made more efficient by government policy, especially around taxation.
Okay.
Yes.
In closing, how does one individual or an organizational level actually set themselves up to tap into these opportunities?
So we shall be hosting the conference, as I said, on the 12th of June, and we encourage individuals to participate in the conference. There will be open, registration on the conference on the QuickNet platform. They can search for AIC 2024 or the CFA Society of East Africa website. They can actually register to attend the conference. And indeed, we would like to also profile the fact that, what are you coming to attend? Are you a scholar? Are you an investor? Are you just, an observer? That will help us, understand and curate the event, around the themes that most of the attendees are requesting to listen to. We shall, of course, have our own themes around policy, around capital, local capital formation, around regulation, around, green financing, gender lens financing, climate financing, innovation, technology, and things such as AI that are coming. But those just present the global opportunity of themes that are available in the mass media. But we'd like to make that as specific as possible to potential people coming for the conference through registration.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, David Ivan Wangolo, who is a Chief Financial Analyst as well as Investment Director with Pearl Capital Partners. He has alluded to us the opportunities, the alternatives that are there, away from, what you have been used to on the daily bread, which is unit trusts, treasury bonds and bills here and there. There's other ways you can actually get that money to work for you. It's called working smart. That brings us to the end of this discussion. We return with yet another discussion. Do stay with us.